Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm here today with another video to talk about the books that I read in the month of August. Now I read 7 months in the book of August. Some of them were incredible and others not so much. There's one DNF in here. If you're new here, welcome. On this channel, we prioritize the inclusion of BIPOC, especially South Asian stories, both in literature and in real life. So we have a lot of book chats, book recommendations, as well as my podcast called Brown People Problems. Alright, so the very first book that I finished in the month of August was The Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi by Shannon Chakrabarti. Now, I know I talked a little bit about this book in my July wrap-up video, but I hadn't finished it. I was reading it. It's a big book. So I finally managed to finish it in the first week of this month. And I gotta say, I gave it an overall 3.5 stars. I actually really enjoyed it up until the last 50 or so pages. Now I know that sounds very particular and very picky, but in all honesty, the story was great. It was so fast-paced, but at the end, it was too much. So let me backtrack. If you haven't heard of this book, or if you have not watched my last video, Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi is basically a historical fiction and a historical fantasy set in our world. So usually fantasies are set in different worlds, but this is set in our world. It's set approximately 1,000 years ago, and the plot centers around like the Indian Ocean and the surrounding countries. So you've got like the coast of Africa, you've got like the Middle East, and you've got the western coast of South Asia. And it's basically about a retired notorious pirate, Amina al-Sarafi, who has retired and she's a bit of a recluse until somebody approaches her with an offer to go back to the seas, an offer that she can't refuse. And that's where our story starts, and it's very adventurous. The title certainly lives up to its name, The Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi. I absolutely loved a female lead, a woman of color female lead. You know, I love that. There was some really, really great historical information and historical context about like history at that time, and that's what I really appreciated about this book. It is set in our time, but it still has some fantastical elements. Like there's still a bit of magic, but it's not so overwhelming that you need to learn like a whole new magic system or a whole new world. So I would say that if you like middle grade fantasy, I believe this would be like a lower middle grade fantasy. This would be great. There's a cast of really lovable characters. You certainly get to kind of go on a ride with them and see all of their adventures. And I really enjoyed that part. I really loved the bit about history of the Middle East and what was happening at that time as well. And the author herself, I believe she's a bit of a scholar in Islamic studies. And so the way that she kind of wove religious and cultural history into was super cool. I really enjoyed that. I love history. My problem with this book was in the last 50 pages. And I'm not going to be ruining anything here, of course, but for me, the way that I like my books to be is the end is where, unless this is going to be a series, the end is where everything comes together. End of the books is not typically where we see a whole bunch of new characters come up or random like plot twists. And I had a similar problem with the Priory of the Orange Tree, which I have up there with by Samantha Shannon, that I felt like too much was just squeezed in the book. And that's how I felt about Amina al-Sarafi. Like there was too much squeezed in at the end. But in all honesty, I haven't heard other folks complain about this, so it could just be a me thing. It is still actually a really lovely book. I really liked that. A woman of color pirate, that's incredible. That's very badass. I never liked pirate stories, so it took me a while to get on the bandwagon with this one. But I think you should definitely check it out. And if you do, I'd be curious to hear if you had the same issue with the ending as I did. Alright, after that, I finished The Mistress of Bhatia House by Sujata Massey. I am sorry I keep going on and on and on about this series. Actually, I'm not sorry. It's a great series, but I have talked a lot about this series, especially this book, But if by some miracle you haven't heard me talk about this, this is the fourth installment in a historical fiction series that's set in 1920s India, and it follows our main character, Praveen Mistry, who is the first female lawyer in the city of Bombay or Mumbai, and then she finds herself getting involved in all of these mysteries and like legal cases and legal mysteries that are very relevant to that historical context and that are just so fascinating. This I would compare this to like Agatha Christie books, you know, like that complex, rich, confusing, mind-boggling type of mysteries that we all used to know and love. And now I think mysteries can be a little bit super simple, but this is great. So I gave it a 4.5 stars. I love this series. I love Praveen. I think she's one of my favorite female leads of all time. This one in particular was a lot more dense than some of the other ones. So we certainly have a number of characters and we're getting to know the characters a little bit better too. So a recurring character that's been present in all the books has been Gulnaz, who is Praveen's sister-in-law, and she certainly plays a bigger role this time around, and I really like that. And I don't really have any qualms with this book. I really enjoyed it. There's a huge focus on the lack of women's, you know, reproductive health education at that time, and the main plot certainly revolves around that. If you haven't checked out this series, I would highly encourage you to do so. Sujata Massey she's an incredible writer. Like, she is so good at storytelling, and she's so good at painting her characters to be so imperfect but also so relatable, and I really enjoyed this. I think everyone should check it out. Alright, the third book that I finished in the month of August is The Davenports by Crystal Marquis. And this is apparently first in a series, but it came out this year, so I'm assuming that the next one's going to be a bit later on. But this was really nice. This is a YA book, and it is a bit like rich people drama. Was a subgenre that I haven't read in a while, and I have stayed away from YA for some time, but I actually really enjoyed this book. I ended up giving it a 3.5 stars. I thought it was great. So The Davenports is basically about this wealthy black family living in Chicago in the 1920s. So this is when there's, you know, like so much conflict in the country around like slavery, and you know, we're kind of proceeding towards the abolishment of slavery. And so to see rich black folks live a quote-unquote normal life at that time was really interesting. And I like how the author talks about too how the story is inspired by a real family that we've kind of forgotten about, some of the more powerful, influential black families of the time, because around the turn of the century, apparently it was very common for those who had been formerly enslaved, had been freed, and they went on to start businesses, they became entrepreneurs, they contributed to the economy in this like really wonderful way. So it was really interesting to read about this family. It follows the story of basically all the children, and then they have a maid. And, you know, there's a lot of drama, teen angst, everyone's in love with the wrong person. But the one thing that I really appreciate about this book is usually with typical teen angst books, I can be rolling my eyes a little bit, not to say that those problems are not valid, but I think where I am in my life now, I just don't find them as relatable as I did some time ago. So what I really appreciated about The Davenports was that, yes, there was some teen angst, but they were struggling with some really relevant, really adult problems of, you know, identity and what it's like to be a black person with power at that time, and how that impacts like how the society treats you and how your identity is formed in that. And I thought it was incredible. That was such a cool new perspective. And that was certainly like a blind spot for me. So I'm so happy that I discovered this book. Okay, after that, I read Pineapple Street by Jenny Jackson. I recently spoke a lot about this book in another video that I recently just did on new releases. And I will link it up here as well as in the description box below if you want to hear me rant on a little bit more about this book. But I ended up giving it what is it, 3 stars, I think? About 3.5, actually. I'm maybe gonna lower it to 3 now that I think about it. So this was a pretty good book, right? What I really enjoyed was just how like casually you can read it. It certainly flies through. There's nothing super heavy or major going on in this book. But that is also my problem, is that nothing really happened in this book. This book is a rich people drama that is about this family who lives on Pineapple Street in Brooklyn. And you have this drama following the parents and then the children who are adults and the folks that they're married to. So you certainly get a whole cast of characters and you get almost everybody's perspective, which I really enjoy. But it was also really boring because nothing really happened. If you like Crazy Rich Asians, that was great. That was great rich people drama. If you like The Nest, that was also very good. But I felt like this book could have been more. My biggest qualm with this book is that I went in with really high expectations, and perhaps that is my fault, but only because it has been endorsed by like some really amazing authors, and it was on this like a Heather's list in Canada, which is a curated list here. And that's a pretty famous book list, and everything that's on Heather's picks is usually incredible. And so this was on it and I was extremely excited, but it just fell flat for me. I don't know if many other people, I know some of you certainly felt that way, but I was a little bit disappointed. It is in a sense like a good beach read if you're just needing, I guess, a bit of a palate cleanser in between books, or you just need something very simple to escape to, so nothing that's going to require of you to use a lot of brain power to follow the story. This can be a really great option. I flew through it in 2 days, and there were certainly some parts that I really liked and I appreciated, but on the whole it definitely fell a little bit flat for me. I feel really awful saying that because I know that book reviews and book recommendations are so personal, so please know that just because I didn't love it doesn't mean you are not going to love it. These are just my personal thoughts. Like for example, I really appreciated how we had like one minority character who was married into this family, and it was nice to get a glimpse, like a tiny glimpse and a taste of being a minority in a rich white family. So that's that. Those are my thoughts on this one. Thankfully, the next book that I feel much better about. This is Sunshine Nails by Mai Nguyen. And this is a Canadian author. She's a Torontonian, originally from Halifax here in Canada. And this is her debut novel. And I thought it was incredible. So Sunshine Nails is about a Vietnamese Canadian family, the Tran family, who own this nail salon in Toronto called Sunshine Nails. And it's multi-perspective. So you have Debbie and Phil. You have Debbie and Phil, who are Vietnamese immigrants, and it follows their children as well, their adult children, and their stories. And I talked about this in the last video as well, so I will link that below as well. You can check out a little bit more in-depth review of this, but I thought it was so fun. I haven't heard many people talk about this book here on BookTube. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was quirky, it was fun, it was fast-paced, with such a lovely focus on immigrant stories. We hear a lot actually from the parents themselves too, and not just like, you know, the child and the child of immigrants perspective is of course there, but so is the actual older generation like immigrant perspective there. And I really valued that. Nail techs are folks that are just not there in books that I have read. So I loved how all the characters in this book were nail techs, and I know that was the point of this book. The author, her parents ran a nail salon in Halifax, and so she wanted to write a story where the nail techs were main characters for once instead of being on the sidelines. So I really liked that. I really enjoyed it. I thought this is such a great summer read. There is, of course, family drama in here too, if you enjoy that for the summertime. And I really fell in love with all the characters. There's a lot of character development in here too, especially for some characters more than others. And I really like how the characters are also so imperfect. the author really takes you inside their heads, and they are so complex and they're so contradicting, and you know, some chapters you really love them, other chapters you really hate them. And I think that love-hate relationship, when I had that with characters, I know that that's a really good book and I really enjoy it, because I hate the black and whiteness and like this like dichotomy that sometimes authors create where you have a hero and you have a villain. I really like everyday folks who are complex and difficult and also loving, and the Tran family certainly fit that bill. All right, after that, I read and DNF'd To Love and to Loathe by Martha Waters. I feel awful DNFing a book, but I got 50% through of the way through and I just wasn't enjoying it. So this is part 2 to Have and to Hoax series. It's a Regency era romance, a historical romance, and I really enjoyed the first one, and so I had high hopes for the second one. And I don't know if it was just the timing wasn't right for me with this book, or I just didn't enjoy these characters, or I'm like a bit hungover from the last book where I was really annoyed with the characters. Could be a combination of all of those three things, but I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I am not getting rid of it though, because usually the books that I DNF I end up donating or just giving away to friends. This one I'm keeping because I will try again with this book. It has happened to me before where I read books that I didn't really enjoy at all, then I put them away only to come back later to them and really enjoy them. So because I'm a mood reader, I try not to knock books off completely anymore. If I don't enjoy them, I try to come back to them as much as possible. So hopefully this is a book I can come back to. I would love to read this again, perhaps when I'm in the mood for Regency era romance. But if you haven't heard of this series, this is a series that's set in Regency era, 1820s, I believe, in England. And it follows a group of friends. In the first book, we have a young widow who finds herself in love with someone else. And in this one, you have the other friends as well. So here you have our female character, Diana, who's Lady Templeton. She has been recently widowed. She's only like 22 or 23, so she's really quite young. And how instead of friends with benefits, you have like a enemies with benefits, a foes with benefits type of a situation that she develops with somebody else in the periphery of their friend group. And his name is Jeremy. He's the Marquis of Willingham. So Jeremy comes to Diana because he's been criticized for his skills in the bedroom by one of his other lady friends, and he needs Diana's help. And they go from being enemies with benefits to, you can imagine, friends with benefits to lovers. And it sounds like a fun book, and I guess it was to some point, and then I just got bored of it, and I was tired of the plot moving so slow. So not a fan, but will certainly come back to this. And the last book that I read in the month of August, I absolutely loved. It is Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. Oh my gosh, this book was amazing. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. This is a very odd premise, so just bear with me as I try to explain this. This has been making its rounds, I guess, a little bit on BookTube. But in case you haven't heard about this is about... So it's about two characters. Tova, who is this elderly woman who works as a cleaner at an aquarium near Seattle. And the second character is an octopus, the giant Pacific octopus at the said aquarium. His name is Marcellus. And he has this like human consciousness, and he's able to understand humans, and like he's not able to speak to them or anything, but he's able to understand them, and he's very intelligent, and they form an unlikely friendship. There's a huge mystery element to this too, so it simultaneously like has you curious and has you on your toes while also being so heartwarming. When I tried explaining this book to people in my life and to my friends, they kind of just looked at me weird because the premise sounds really weird, but I promise you that this was very, very, very lovely, very interesting. Read the back blurb if you get a chance. But there's a mystery element around here because Tova's son, Eric, mysteriously died when he was 18 years old, and this was like 30 years ago. So, and his death was like unsolved. They never found the body, and it was just like ruled as something. And so Tova always knows in her heart of hearts that that's not what happened. And Marcellus, the octopus, knows something about it. And that's where I'm going to leave it. And I really enjoyed it. It was certainly just a teeny tiny bit slow for me in the beginning. I will say I almost wanted to like hear more from the octopus than I did from Tova. And there's other characters here as well, but these two are the main characters. And we get multiple perspectives, but the two main recurring, like majority of the perspectives are Tova and Marcellus. And I just wanted to like know more about the octopus and hear from him. And I was kind of getting like frustrated when I just kept reading more from like Tova. And I think that was my own kind of like frustration that I was feeling with the pacing, but it picked up, I want to say, a quarter of the way through, and then it just went strong till the very end. This was so incredibly charming. It was so heartfelt. It made me really happy reading this book, and it was just very satisfying. You know, some books that you read and it's like, those books feel like a glass of cold water on a hot day. Just so satisfying for the soul, and that's what this book felt like. I'm loaning it out to a friend tomorrow because I think they would actually really appreciate it. And if you have read this, if there's any other similar books, I would really appreciate it. I've never read. I know there's Lily and the Octopus, right? I forget the name of the author. I've never read it. I've heard about it. If any of you have read Lily and the Octopus, is this something similar? Like, is there a sense of like consciousness that the dog has? I believe it's a dog in that book. Like, does the dog have consciousness? And is it about that dog's relationship with the human? Let me know. I actually really enjoyed this. I really thought I wouldn't. And as I was picking this up, I was kind of thinking to myself, what if this absolutely sucks? Then I would have wasted my money. But I actually really enjoyed it. I gave this 4.5 stars. All right, everyone, that's it. Those are the 7 books I read in the month of August. If you have read any of these, let me know what you thought of them. And if you have any recommendations for me, let me know. I'd be happy to check them out. I will be making a video soon on my fall TBR list. And keep an eye out for that one because we'll be moving a little bit away from literary fiction and more into fantasy and thrillers. And those genres are a staple for fall. We'll still try to keep a good mix, but that's likely where we're transitioning. Thanks so much for joining me today. Thanks for diversifying your reading intentionally, and I'll see you in my next one.